A man who carries himself with genuine confidence does not need to dominate a conversation. He does not speak louder simply to appear powerful, nor does he fill every silence because he is afraid of losing attention. His strength is visible in the calmness of his presence. When he speaks to a woman, he treats her as a person to understand rather than an audience he must impress. He does not approach the interaction with the desperate question of whether she likes him. Instead, he remains grounded in his own identity and allows the conversation to develop naturally. When a man speaks to a woman with genuine confidence, he does not feel the need to prove that he is powerful. His confidence is communicated through the way he carries himself, the patience with which he speaks, and the absence of desperation in his behavior. He does not enter the conversation thinking, how can I make her like me? He enters with a more grounded mindset. Let me understand who this person is, and let her understand who I am. That difference changes everything. Desperation makes communication feel like a negotiation for approval. Confidence makes it feel like an exchange between two people who are both free to choose. A man who desperately wants approval may agree with everything, laugh at everything, exaggerate his achievements, or constantly search for signs that the woman is impressed. He becomes focused on her reaction rather than the actual conversation. His attention moves away from authenticity and toward performance. The problem is that performance eventually becomes exhausting. You cannot maintain an artificial personality forever, and people often sense when someone is trying too hard. Calm confidence requires no such performance. You can show interest without becoming needy. You can compliment someone without expecting anything in return. You can express attraction without making your entire emotional state dependent on the response. This creates a completely different atmosphere because there is no pressure hidden underneath your words. Confidence also means being comfortable with silence. An insecure person may feel compelled to fill every pause because silence makes him wonder whether the other person is losing interest. He begins talking faster, explaining more, and revealing things that would have been better left unsaid. A confident person does not fear a quiet moment. He understands that conversation has a natural rhythm. Sometimes people think, sometimes they observe, sometimes they simply enjoy being present. The ability to remain comfortable without constantly seeking reassurance communicates emotional stability. Another important element is having your own direction. A man who has meaningful goals, interests, responsibilities, and standards does not need every conversation to become the center of his world. He can appreciate someone's presence without abandoning his own identity. This independence makes communication healthier because he is not approaching the interaction from a position of emotional hunger. He is sharing his world rather than asking another person to complete it. There is also strength in accepting uncertainty. You may not know whether someone likes you. You may not know where a conversation will lead. You may not know whether a relationship will develop. Instead of trying to control every outcome, you can remain present and allow things to unfold naturally. Trying to force certainty often creates pressure, while accepting uncertainty creates freedom. If the connection is mutual, it can grow. If it is not, you can accept that reality without humiliating yourself or becoming resentful. True confidence also requires respecting the other person's freedom. You do not need to manipulate someone into giving you attention. You do not need jealousy games, emotional pressure, or calculated behavior. If interest exists, communicate it honestly. If boundaries exist, respect them. If the answer is no, accept it. This level of emotional maturity protects both people from unnecessary conflict. Ultimately, calm confidence comes from knowing that your worth does not depend on one person's reaction. You can be interested without becoming dependent, expressive without becoming excessive, and confident without becoming arrogant. When your self-respect comes from your character, your discipline, your purpose, and the way you live each day, your conversations become more natural because you are no longer trying to convince another person that you are valuable. You already understand your value, and that quiet certainty allows you to speak with warmth, clarity, patience, and strength without needing to dominate the interaction. Listening deeply is one of the clearest signs of emotional maturity because it requires you to place your attention on another person without constantly trying to redirect the conversation toward yourself. Many people believe they are good communicators because they can speak confidently, tell interesting stories, or keep a conversation moving, but communication is not measured only by how well you speak. It is also measured by how carefully you understand. When you genuinely listen to a woman, you are not simply waiting for your turn to talk. You are paying attention to her words, her emotions, her experiences, and the meaning behind what she is saying. This creates a different kind of connection because people naturally feel more comfortable around someone who makes them feel heard rather than someone who is constantly trying to impress them. A man who listens deeply does not need to prepare a performance. He does not need to constantly demonstrate how intelligent, successful, or interesting he is. Instead, he becomes curious. He asks questions because he actually wants to understand the person in front of him. If she talks about something she cares about, he gives her enough space to explain it. If she shares an experience, he does not immediately turn it into a story about himself. If she expresses an opinion that differs from his, he does not automatically become defensive. He listens first. This does not mean agreeing with everything. It means respecting the other person's right to have a perspective. Listening also reveals details that are easily missed by someone who is focused on performing. You may notice what topics make her enthusiastic, what experiences have shaped her values, what kind of future she imagines, and what qualities she appreciates in people. You may also notice inconsistencies between what someone says and how they behave over time. Words provide information, but patterns provide deeper understanding. A person who repeatedly demonstrates kindness, reliability, honesty, and respect communicates something more meaningful than a single impressive conversation ever could. This is why patience matters. You cannot truly understand another person in one interaction. You need time, observation, and genuine curiosity. Another important aspect of listening is resisting the urge to solve everything immediately. Sometimes people share their frustrations because they want to be understood, not because they are asking for a solution. A man who immediately gives advice may believe he is being helpful, but he may accidentally communicate that her feelings are problems that need to be fixed. Sometimes the stronger response is simply to listen, acknowledge what she is saying, and allow her to express herself fully. Emotional intelligence involves recognizing what the moment actually requires instead of automatically doing what you think should happen. Listening also protects you from making assumptions. Attraction can cause people to imagine qualities in someone that have not yet been demonstrated. They see what they hope to see and ignore information that contradicts their expectations. Careful listening and observation create a more realistic understanding. Instead of falling for an imagined version of someone, you gradually learn who they actually are. This makes relationships healthier because decisions are based on reality rather than fantasy. There is also a quiet confidence in not needing to dominate every conversation. An insecure person may feel pressure to constantly demonstrate value because silence makes him uncomfortable. He talks about achievements, tells stories designed to impress, and searches for opportunities to establish status. But genuine confidence does not require continuous advertisement. A person who knows his own value can allow another person to speak. He does not become smaller because someone else has an interesting story. He does not feel threatened when attention moves away from him. He understands that a meaningful conversation is not a competition for the spotlight. It is an opportunity for two people to discover whether they genuinely understand and appreciate each other. Over time, This habit of deep listening creates stronger connections because people remember how you made them feel. They remember whether they felt respected, whether they could speak without being judged, and whether you were actually present. The ability to listen carefully does not require manipulation or complicated techniques. It requires patience, curiosity, emotional control, and enough confidence to stop performing. When you listen because you genuinely want to understand rather than because you are searching for an advantage, your communication becomes more authentic, your judgment becomes clearer, and your relationships become based on something much stronger than the temporary excitement of trying to impress someone. Respecting a woman's individuality begins with understanding that attraction does not create ownership. When two people are interested in each other, it can be tempting to become overly focused on receiving attention, agreement, or reassurance, but genuine confidence allows you to appreciate someone without trying to control them. A woman has her own ambitions, friendships, opinions, boundaries, interests, and vision for her life. Those things existed before you entered her world and will continue to exist regardless of whether a relationship develops. A mature man does not see this independence as a threat. He sees it as part of what makes another person interesting. Instead of attempting to reshape her personality to fit his expectations, he becomes curious about who she actually is. This requires letting go of the fantasy that connection means finding someone who agrees with everything you believe. Two people can have different interests, perspectives, and personalities while still treating each other with respect. In fact, healthy differences can create opportunities for learning. The goal is not to erase those differences, but to understand them. Respect also means allowing another person to make decisions without attempting to punish them for choosing differently. If she does not want something you want, you can accept the disagreement without turning it into an attack on your worth. Rejection can be painful, but it does not justify resentment. A confident person understands that attraction must be mutual to have meaning. You cannot force someone to feel what they do not feel, and trying to manipulate that response only destroys the possibility of genuine connection. This is where self-respect becomes important. Respecting another person does not mean abandoning your own standards. You can appreciate her independence while maintaining your own boundaries. You can be generous without becoming a servant. You can compromise without surrendering your principles. You can listen to her perspective without automatically accepting it. A healthy relationship requires two people who are capable of standing on their own while choosing to stand together. Seeking approval constantly creates an imbalance because one person becomes responsible for the other's emotional security. If you are always asking whether she is pleased with you, whether she still likes you, or whether you have done enough to earn her attention, your behavior may gradually become artificial. You begin adjusting yourself to maintain approval rather than expressing who you truly are. This is not genuine connection, it is performance. The stronger approach is to live according to clear values and allow the other person to decide whether those values are compatible with hers. Another important part of respecting individuality is avoiding unnecessary jealousy and control. A woman's friendships, career, interests, and personal time do not automatically represent threats to a relationship. Trust cannot exist when every independent action is treated as suspicious. If trust has been earned, it should be allowed to breathe. If trust has been repeatedly broken, the appropriate response is honest communication and clear boundaries, not surveillance or manipulation. Respect means dealing with reality rather than attempting to control another person's behavior. The same principle applies to communication. Speak honestly about what you want, but do not use pressure to obtain it. Express your feelings without making them someone else's obligation. If you care, say so. If something concerns you, discuss it calmly. If your needs are not compatible, recognize the incompatibility rather than trying to force a different outcome. This creates dignity on both sides. A mature relationship is not built by one person winning and the other surrendering. It is built when two individuals freely choose cooperation because they value each other. When you stop seeking constant approval and start practicing mutual respect, your relationships become more authentic. You no longer need to pretend to be someone you are not, and you no longer expect another person to become someone she is not. You meet each other as two complete individuals, each responsible for their own identity, choices, and boundaries. And from that foundation, genuine trust and meaningful connection have room to grow. Self-respect is one of the strongest foundations of healthy communications because it determines what you are willing to accept, what you are willing to give, and how you respond when your expectations are not met. When speaking with a woman, genuine confidence does not come from constantly proving that you are desirable. It comes from knowing that your worth exists independently of whether someone chooses you. This distinction matters because attraction can make people behave irrationally. A man may become willing to tolerate disrespect simply because he fears losing someone's attention. He may abandon his priorities, ignore his own boundaries, or repeatedly chase someone who has clearly shown little interest. He tells himself that persistence proves devotion, when in reality he may simply be afraid of rejection. Self-respect requires a different response. You can express interest openly while still recognizing that mutual interest is necessary. If someone does not reciprocate, you accept the informations instead of attempting to negotiate their feelings. This does not mean becoming cold or bitter. It means understanding that genuine connection cannot be forced. A relationship built on one person's constant pursuit and the other's reluctant participation will eventually become exhausting for both people. Another important part of self-respect is maintaining your own life. When you become interested in someone, it is natural to want to spend more time with them, but losing yourself in the relationship creates imbalance. Continue developing your skills, maintaining meaningful friendships, pursuing your goals, and taking care of your responsibilities. A healthy connection should add to your life rather than replace it. When you have a strong sense of purpose outside the relationship, you are less likely to become emotionally dependent on every message, conversation, or moment of attention. You can enjoy connection without becoming controlled by it. Self-respect also means communicating your boundaries clearly. If something makes you uncomfortable, you do not need to pretend that everything is fine simply to avoid conflict. You can speak calmly and directly about what you need. Boundaries are not threats. They are information about what you are willing to participate in and what you are not. If someone repeatedly ignores those boundaries, the answer is not to become more desperate for their approval. The answer is to evaluate whether the relationship is healthy enough to continue. There is a major difference between compromise and self-abandonment. Compromise allows two people to adjust while still maintaining their core values. Self-abandonment occurs when one person repeatedly sacrifices their identity, standards, or dignity to keep another person satisfied. The first creates mutual respect. The second creates resentment. A confident person knows the difference. He can apologize when he is wrong without feeling humiliated. He can admit uncertainty without feeling weak. He can change his behavior when genuine feedback reveals a problem, but he does not constantly reshape himself according to another person's temporary mood. His standards are flexible enough for healthy growth, but strong enough to preserve his identity. Self-respect also protects you from manipulative behavior. If someone intentionally uses jealousy, guilt, silent treatment, insults, or emotional pressure to control you, you do not need to respond with manipulation of your own. You can recognize the behavior, communicate your boundaries, and decide whether continued involvement is healthy. Strength does not require playing psychological games. It requires clarity. The most attractive form of confidence is often the simplest, knowing who you are, knowing what you value, and refusing to betray yourself for temporary attention. When you approach relationships from this position, you no longer treat another person's approval as something you must earn at any cost. You offer genuine interest while preserving your independence. You give affection without surrendering dignity. You compromise without abandoning your principles. And if the connection is not mutual, you can walk away without hatred because you understand that rejection does not reduce your worth. It simply reveals that the two people were not aligned, allowing you to protect your time, your standards, and your future while remaining respectful toward the other person. Emotional intelligence changes the way you communicate because it teaches you to understand emotions without becoming controlled by them. When you speak with a woman, your goal should never be to manipulate her feelings, create insecurity, or use psychological tricks to make her behave in a certain way. Those tactics may produce temporary reactions, but they cannot create genuine trust. Real strength comes from being able to recognize emotions, communicate honestly, and remain steady even when the situation becomes uncertain. A person with emotional intelligence notices when a conversation is becoming tense and understands that pushing harder will probably make things worse. Instead of reacting impulsively, he slows down and chooses his words carefully. He understands that people sometimes speak from frustration, disappointment, fear, or exhaustion, and that a single emotional moment does not always represent their complete character or intentions. This does not mean ignoring harmful behavior. It means responding to the actual situation rather than immediately creating a story about what the other person must mean. Emotional intelligence also requires understanding your own emotions. If you feel jealous, ask yourself what is underneath that feeling. Perhaps you fear losing someone. Perhaps you feel insecure about your position. Perhaps a previous experience has made you suspicious. Recognizing the source of the emotion gives you the opportunity to address it honestly rather than turning it into accusations. A less mature response might be to become controlling, withdraw affection, provoke jealousy, or demand constant reassurance. A healthy response is to communicate clearly, explain what you are feeling, listen to the other person's perspective, and decide together what boundaries or expectations are reasonable. This creates trust because neither person has to guess what the other is trying to accomplish. Emotional intelligence also means understanding that communication is not only about words, tone, timing, facial expressions, pauses, and changes in behavior can provide useful information, but they should not automatically be interpreted as proof of someone's intentions. Good judgment requires asking rather than assuming. If someone seems distant, you do not immediately conclude that they have lost interest. You can simply ask whether something is wrong. This approach prevents unnecessary conflict because it replaces speculation with communication. Another important quality is the ability to handle rejection gracefully. Not every woman will be interested in you, and not every relationship will develop in the way you hoped. Emotional maturity allows you to accept this without turning disappointment into anger. You can feel hurt while still respecting the other person's decision. You can acknowledge that something did not work without insulting the person or attempting to punish them emotionally. This ability demonstrates that your feelings are real, but your behavior remains under your control. Emotional intelligence also helps during disagreements. Instead of trying to win, you can focus on understanding the actual problem. Perhaps both people want the same outcome, but have different ways of reaching it. Perhaps one person feels unheard. Perhaps expectations were never clearly communicated. Once the underlying issue becomes visible, the conversation becomes much easier to navigate. The goal is not to eliminate every uncomfortable emotion. The goal is to prevent emotions from destroying communication. A mature man can be affectionate without becoming dependent, confident without becoming arrogant, and direct without becoming aggressive. He can express vulnerability without demanding that another person manage his emotions for him. He understands that healthy relationships require honesty from both sides. Most importantly, he recognizes that emotional intelligence is not a technique for controlling another person. It is a discipline for controlling himself. When you can remain calm under pressure, communicate your needs clearly, respect another person's feelings, and accept outcomes you cannot control, your presence becomes more trustworthy. You no longer need games to create attraction or fear to maintain attention. You create connection through consistency, honesty, empathy, and self-control, allowing both people to participate freely rather than trying to manipulate one another into staying. True authority does not come from trying to appear superior to other people. It comes from knowing yourself well enough that you do not need constant approval, attention, or recognition to feel secure. When a man speaks to a woman from this position, his communication becomes natural because he is not performing a character designed to impress her. He can be confident without arrogance, interested without desperation, and respectful without becoming submissive. His presence is supported by the way he lives, not by exaggerated claims about who he is. Character becomes visible through consistency. Anyone can speak confidently for a few minutes, but sustained behavior reveals much more. A man who says he values honesty but repeatedly lies will eventually be recognized for his actions rather than his words. A man who speaks about discipline but cannot keep commitments will struggle to create trust. On the other hand, someone who quietly follows through on promises, treats people respectfully, takes responsibility for mistakes, and continues working toward meaningful goals develops credibility without needing to announce it. This is why actions often carry more weight than impressive conversation. When you know that your daily behavior reflects your values, you become less dependent on explaining yourself. You do not need to tell everyone that you are reliable if your behavior consistently demonstrates reliability. You do not need to announce that you are confident if you can remain composed when circumstances become uncertain. You do not need to convince someone that you have purpose if your life already contains goals that demand your attention. This creates a grounded form of confidence that is difficult to fake and unnecessary to advertise. Letting your actions speak also means refusing to chase validation. There is a difference between expressing interest and seeking constant reassurance. You can tell a woman that you enjoy being around her without needing her to repeatedly confirm your worth. You can appreciate her attention without becoming dependent on it. You can be disappointed when things do not work out without turning that disappointment into resentment. This emotional independence creates healthier relationships because neither person is forced to carry the other's entire sense of self-worth. A strong connection should be chosen, not required for survival. Character also appears in how you treat people when there is nothing to gain. It is easy to be polite when you want someone's approval. The deeper test is how you behave toward people who cannot offer you status, money, attention, or opportunity. Respecting service workers, listening to people who disagree with you, keeping promises when no one is watching, and admitting mistakes when doing so is uncomfortable reveal far more about your character than public displays of confidence. A woman who observes these patterns is likely to notice them over time, just as you will notice them in her. This is why there is little value in trying to create a carefully engineered image. An image requires constant maintenance. Character does not. If you want to communicate with greater confidence, build a life that gives you genuine reasons to respect yourself. Develop useful skills, keep your commitments, take care of your responsibilities, learn from failure, treat people with dignity, maintain boundaries, pursue meaningful goals, become comfortable being alone without becoming isolated. These qualities create internal stability, and internal stability changes the way you communicate. You stop searching for clever lines because you are no longer trying to manufacture value through words. You become more interested in having a meaningful conversation than performing for approval. You can laugh at yourself without humiliation, disagree without hostility, and show affection without fear. Most importantly, you allow the other person to make her own choice. If she is interested, you welcome the connection. If she is not, you respect her decision and continue with your life. That ability to remain grounded, regardless of the outcome, is one of the clearest signs that your confidence comes from within rather than from someone else's reaction. When your actions consistently reflect your values, your communication becomes simpler, calmer, and more authentic. You do not need to dominate, manipulate, or impress. You simply show up as yourself, communicate honestly, respect the other person, and let time reveal the strength of your character.